neutral zone in 1 minute, Captain.
Stand by. Approaching neutral zone.
I'm getting something on the distress channel.
May I remind the captain, the starship enters the zone. Now entering the neutral zone.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Neutral Zone. My name is Joshua Wagner, and I'm here with my friend John Ondo. John, how you doing? Welcome to the Neutral Zone.
We love the neutral zone, and the thing that we created the neutral zone is to be a safe place. We can discuss Star Trek because, you know, Josh and I have busy jobs. We have stressful things going on. We got family and all that stuff like everybody else. And the thing that we can enjoy is sit back and relax and get a little Star Trek on. And tonight, I know we've talked about the original series a lot, but Josh, he is the Next Generation guy. I mean, you are all about the Next Generation.
Well, I've been a fan of Star Trek my whole life. My brother, as I mentioned in other episodes of the Neutral Zone chat, my brother got me into it. It's how I know you, actually, is through my brother. Also, Yep. You guys went to high school together. And it's how we know each other. And I watched the old series, the original series in syndication, just like you did growing up. I played with the toys and the models and things like that. And then something amazing happened right around my 10th birthday, just a few weeks before my 10th birthday. The greatest show ever came on.
Baywatch?
Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Oh, okay.
Baywatch? No. I think that wasn't too far after that though. But
it was
I remember
I
remember seeing the first encounter at Farpoint when I was a kid, and so I know that. So here's, before we go on, my dear friends who have come to the Neutral Zone, you have to know something, that I'm a huge Next Generation fan, and John is a huge original series fan. Yeah. So it's
I like
not
the Next
that
Generation.
I'm right and he's
There's some good stuff in Next
right,
Generation.
but you like the original series better.
Yeah, it's if you told me I can only have one, I'm going to take the original series in most cases.
Well, again, John, it's not that I'm right and you're wrong. It's just that you're wrong, and that's all. So anyway,
how many episodes now? I got to do a calculation. The Next Generation, the original series, we know has 79 episodes. Next Generation had 7 seasons. Roughly, almost all of them had 26 episodes, except for season 2. How many episodes were there total? I don't even know here.
Oh, I don't know about that. I'm not.
A lot more than the
question.
Original series. It's
a lot more. Yeah, well, it would be 20, about roughly 25 times 7.
Yeah.
So about 150 episodes or so.
Yeah,
of
at least.
TNG. That sounds about right. Yeah, at least. And so I remember seeing it as a kid. Just around my 10th birthday. I in fact missed the first showing of Encounter at Farpoint because I didn't know it was on. It was not on a network necessarily.
It did get picked up on a lot of independent stations. A lot of network affiliates didn't have it, and if they did, they ran it like at 12 o'clock on Sundays. So it was kind of a hit and miss.
Yeah, and it was exciting because, you know, for almost 20 years at that point, it was exactly 20 years. We had a few movies. I think we had up to Star Trek 3 definitely at that point, and Star Trek 4 is 87.
Yeah,
so Star Trek 4 may have just come out that year.
Well, let me give you the timeline. Next Generation premiered on September 28th, 1987. And if you remember, in the end of Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, they gave them the new Enterprise, which was the Dash A. So when later on the Dash D showed up, you kind of knew where you were. It wasn't like what's this? So if I recall, they had already established there's going to be new Enterprises with the Dash now on them.
Really exciting times. You know, I have a Next Generation uniform from the first season, the famous onesie. I'm not allowed to wear that in public anymore because it frightens children and all that kind of stuff, and the old people, and the judge said no. Anyway, It was exciting times to have that. And of course, you know, I think that much like the original series in some ways, but much more clearly, I think we can say, Next Generation took a couple of years to figure out who it was. Yeah. And how it was interacting. And I suspect that this is, maybe this is harsh of me to say this, but it was really good that Roddenberry had to pass the torch on. It's unfortunately he had to die to do it. But I think Roddenberry, certainly had a vision that was really relevant to the 1960s, and then when you got to the 80s and lots of things had changed, I'm not sure that particular vision was always 100% on target. And so, you really see in the first 2 seasons, you really see a couple of really great episodes and some great character development. But as any good fan of TNG knows, it really starts taking off in the 3rd season after Roddenberry was kind of out of the picture. I think Roddenberry was still alive during the third season, but he had pretty much stepped down because of health reasons, and it became I think it became a phenomenal show. I think it had some really great. I think it arced really high up until about the middle of the sixth season, and then kind of jumped the shark a little bit. Probably still had some great episodes toward the end, but development, the Klingons, and all sorts of things, and it was really just a fantastic show. As you've mentioned in other episodes, there was almost no. He didn't want to have any conflict on the bridge, and then of course we start seeing that conflict. Really exemplified in the fact that Riker tries to kill Picard when he becomes a Borg. So there's this, there is this conflict that kind of happens. You have to have conflict and difficulty and overcome obstacle in order to have a story.
And I think, Josh, as we're going to talk about our top 10 things that we like or we think it makes the Next Generation great. I think that's probably one of the things I will put first is that it was so radically different, and maybe some people wouldn't think this, but it was so radically a different departure from the original series. There was a conscious effort for Roddenberry. He didn't want to focus on the technical on this, hence being in the first season, they had chief engineers, but they rotated. There seemed to be a bunch of chief engineers. There was not a Scotty on this ship. And that was a departure. The ship was big. And I referred to it like the Love Boat. It was different than the kind of more tightly confined Enterprise, Constitution class. You had Wesley on the bridge. Don't get me into that, but it was definitely a departure to have Wesley and a counselor who's advising the captain. And where you saw the departure really is Picard, which I'll later talk about. Definitely one of the assets of the ship, but he ran the Enterprise more like a CEO, board meetings and let's discuss this, versus Kirk, who's like, let's get the phasers out and start shooting things. So that was one of my things about the Next Generation, to its benefit. And I don't think it would have lasted a season if they did. They didn't duplicate the original series. I think if they had duplicated the original series, we would have been very frustrated and said, this is not Kirk, this is not Spock, and let's move on. But the fact that they did a pretty radical departure, I think was a good thing.
Or if they simply tried to continue immediately after, there's for some reason that there's this love affair with putting things right around the original series, like the J.J. Abrams movies and even Enterprise and, sort of thing. And the fact that they put it 80 years after Kirk and Spock and McCoy allowed them to have some novelty, allowed them to have a backstory for these characters that didn't necessarily involve, direct relationship to the original guys. It sort of had a thematic relationship. Of course, you see McCoy in the first episode. He's a 170-year-old admiral at that point.
It's funny, Josh, that of the characters, McCoy's in the first episode. Spock shows up, obviously, I think in season 5 or so. Scotty shows up in an episode. Sarek shows up in an episode. But the one person who never shows up in a TV episode and kind of did in a movie, in one of the not greatest movies, is, of course, Kirk, which I always thought was interesting. That Kirk just kind of disappeared in the Next Generation.
Well, he's mentioned in one episode, The Naked Now, I think is what it was. They mentioned that, in reference to the Naked Time back in the old series. And so it was kind of a nod to him, but of course, more to the character than to Shatner himself, because apparently Shatner was just really hard to work with. So anyway, one of the things that I really liked about it was, I got to tell you that my favorite Enterprise is still the Enterprise D. I just think it's a beautiful ship. I saw that saucer section come off for the first time, and it was really just an interesting thing to see the battle bridge and the saucer section do its thing. And I thought that Farpoint, whether you love it or not, it's a little bit of a goofy episode, but it had all the makings, all the bones of something that was really going to be really great and fantastic. And I think that introducing Q right away and sort of this whole idea of putting humanity, I'm kind of bleeding into the next one, but let's go back to the ship. That's my first thing is I think the ship, is much more technologically advanced. It's the flagship of the Federation. It's the biggest ship in the fleet. It's the strongest ship in the fleet. I think it's just a beautiful thing. The Galaxy class, of course, makes a great appearance several times in Deep Space Nine later on as a great warship, and they take the families off, I assume, when they went to war, but. I just thought it was a beautiful ship. I have the die-cast model from 1987, which is about this big, and maybe it's about that big. And the saucer section comes off, and I used to take that saucer section off and just look at both parts when I was a kid. And I just thought that was a really beautiful and it's my favorite ship of the line, and I just think that they did a great job designing it and did a great job shooting it, and it was just a beautiful thing.
My understanding was that that all the ships, the Constitution class included, were supposed to be able to saucer separate, and that was part of the original plan. But again, budget, and so forth allowed them never to do that. But they were able to pull it off with the D finally in the movie. The other thing I would mention now, I'll put it as the thing that made the Next Generation great, was Worf. I love Worf. He was one of my favorite characters, and part of it was, and forgive me if I offend anyone, most of the crew was kind of just vanilla boring in the episodes. Worf stood out. He was different. He was aggressive. He would be where everybody else is sitting around holding hands a lot of times in the staff meetings. Worf was the ones that always doubted intentions of people and certain things. And later on, Picard kind of gets into that, and you see a real bond between Picard and Worf, which is pretty cool. But he was one of the reasons I liked the Next Generation, because it felt like a lot of times it was more like we are a UN ship going through and having peace, and I really, it's a TV show. I wanted to see some phasers firing, and Worf was the guy with the phasers, and so he was, to me, another great part of the Next Generation.
Yeah, and I think I think other people sense that too. I remember as a kid, when that voice would come on at the end, next time on Star Trek: The Next Generation, they would always, often in the first 2 seasons, they would often tease us with the ship firing phasers or something in the next episode. And then it was, of course, in Picard's imagination or so. I don't know, that's not true, but you know what I mean. So I just think that we all wanted a little bit more action, especially in those first couple of seasons. But I think they got there. I think that they got there with Wolf 359. I think they got there with the Romulans in later episodes with reunification. The one with Spock. And I think that we got to see some of that conflict that happened within, particularly the Klingon Empire. With the Klingon Civil War with the Duras family. So I do think that there were some times in which we had this conflict that I think people were feeling the same thing. We got the Borg in the second season. Yep. With the Enterprise blowing holes in the side of the Borg ship and stuff. So there was probably, as I recall, always being a little bit disappointed about the fact that there wasn't more action. It was, in those first couple of years.
There seemed to be a conscious, and again, the writers and the franchise has moved away from this like a skunk. But there seemed to be the Roddenberry that we have become the superior Federation and we have the best ship, and there's really nothing you can do to us. And there was almost a cockiness about Picard that even when a villain would show up, it was kind of like, we're going to take care of you, which was so different than the conflict we had in really the original series and later on with all the other series. So I think that was something they had to change, and that's when the Borg, because up until there was one called Conspiracy, which is a great episode, but they still beat that one. But the Borg was the first time you really saw, you better turn tail and run, these guys are mean. Up till then, it was pretty much, we're the Federation and we're the Enterprise and we can kick anybody's butt.
Right, and that was what was that episode Q, I think it was. That was sort of the point of the episode, that there had been sort of a hubris amongst the Federation, that they could beat anything that they encountered, and that's one of the reasons that Q flung them out to the Delta Quadrant, was to show them that there are bigger things out there and they had better be careful. I'm going to say that one of my favorite things about the Next Generation is the character Q. I think Q is a great character, and of course he appears throughout the series. My favorite episode with Q is the one, I can't think of the name of the episode offhand, but it's the one where Picard gets stabbed in the back by the Nausicaans, and Q lets him go back and relive that time.
That's a good episode.
It's a good episode. It's a great episode. I think it's a season 5 or 6 episode. Q is really a helper in this one. He really helps Picard to see that if he didn't take those risks as a young man, he wouldn't have become the captain that he was a guy who understood the necessity of taking a risk. And so in this sense, he wasn't just being some kind of obnoxious. Mm-hmm. And who even knows if Q was actually there? Picard's laying on the table dying and stuff, and so we don't even know if that really happened or if it's just in his head. But I assume that Q was real in that one, but it wasn't a Sopranos sort of dream sequence. But I just think that that interaction was really great, because Q really gave him an opportunity to see the man that he had become because of the choices that he had made. So
one of the things that I'm going to put down, and this kind of ties into one of our points with the stories, is one of the great things about The Next Generation is Picard's red jacket. Because whenever there's a red jacket on the episode, that's a good episode. Because that was something introduced around the, I believe it was season 4 when things really take off. They gave him a jacket for whatever reason. He starts wearing a blue uniform and a red jacket over it. And those episodes, Darmok and Jalard at Tanagra, and they begin to do the Bajoran.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a lot of good stuff in those episodes. And they get a little bit more phaser ready and go to planets. And so for me, The Next Generation, one of the great benefits is that red jacket. When Picard wears that, you got some good stories coming.
And again, just to go on with one of the next things that I really like, I love Picard myself. I think that, clearly, Riker was supposed to be the rough and tumbly one, the one going on all the way missions and things like that. But Picard being a sort of Renaissance man and sort of this diplomat and this sort of, I like the quiet hero types. He's a hero not because he wants the praise, but because it's the right thing to do. Not that Kirk didn't do that. But Kirk also liked the praise. I mean, Kirk liked to know that he was the top dog. But I think that Picard, is a great character in that regard. And I like the fact that there are times in which we get to see Picard with his guard down, without being that sort of superhero.
Family is a great episode where you see him with his brother. Matter of fact, I just watched that one again last night. And that's such a good episode. Right after the Borg had assimilated him, he's with his brother who also doesn't like him. And that's just a really true core episode that if you've not watched, you need to watch it. And it's beautifully acted by both Patrick Stewart and the gentleman who plays his brother. Just it's very British, even though they were French.
Yes, it is very for two French guys. It was a very British episode. I think Picard is a great character. I don't think anybody would fight me on that. If you do, you're crazy.
He's more like the professor in school or in college you had a deep amount of respect for, and you didn't dare mess up because you knew it would be bad.
So what's your next one?
Well, the thing is, there was a lot of great. We mentioned the new villains, and we kind of tapped on this a little bit. Obviously, we saw some new villains pop up. I was not a big fan of the Ferengi. To me, they were more comical than they were really a villain. The Romulans got a little bit more intense. The Klingons, obviously, you couldn't quite tell what was going on. But of course, when they brought in Mick Fleetwood and these guys who played the new generation, and they had the new Civil War, that was fun. I wasn't a huge fan of Lusa and B'Etor, but again, they did develop that a little bit. And of course, there was the whole side thing with Yar's daughter. That was the Romulan thing. Confusing, but very effective. But you also saw the Borg. You saw some other villains pop in that were equally kind of interesting, and it made it interesting. It made it good. They didn't just stick you with the same group of people. And as we know,
I did like that
it was in The Next Generation where they introduced the cliffhanger with Best of Both Worlds. We had never really had a 2-part episode before. The only thing like it was in the original series where they broke up the cage into 2 episodes. And called it Menagerie, and it was a different. It wasn't really a cliffhanger, but Best of Both Worlds. And I remember the night that we knew the Borg were coming. It was set up for us in a previous episode, and my friends, I had a couple friends over, and we're watching that episode unfold, and I'm watching the clock, and I'm like, this is, and they're getting ready to fire the weapon. I'm like, this is not. They're not. And then of course, Mr. Worf fire, dun 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 dun. And I remember pulling my hair out, screaming like a girl, like, "Oh my! You just didn't cliffhang us for 4 months for another episode," and that was huge. And it was probably, I know Josh, you and I saw it in the movie theater. They ran the episodes. That was, if there was any moment in Star Trek that was like the "oh my gosh" moment, that was it. I thought.
Sure, and I didn't even realize it at the time. I thought there was just going to be a continuation next week. And then it was like 4 months later. Then I realized, I think a week or two later, that we weren't going to see anything until September again.
Yeah.
I freaked out. It was terrible. I mean, I didn't know what to do with myself for those 4 months. So it was a rough go for those 4 months. It was
we
the
pushed
worst
through
4
it.
months of my life. Yeah, it was, like I said, it's the worst 4 months of my life. But I think that, I just think that there was a lot of great, and I think there was a lot of great writing and storytelling. Again, not to put down Gene Roddenberry, because I think he's great. Without him, we wouldn't have this series at all. But I think once he kind of let go of control and they were able to have a little bit more freedom of what they were doing, you had some great characterization. I like Lursa and B'Etor. I thought that they were good in the series. I didn't think, obviously, in the movie Generations that they were very good. They were sort of shoved in there as a way to kill the Enterprise.
They literally were. They were asked. My understanding from seeing some interviews with Ronald Moore is that they knew that they were the Star Trek movie Generations was to hand off the series to the Next Generation crew, and then Kirk was going to be in it, and they were writing it, and then Paramount said, "We also want you to put Data's emotional chip in it. We want you to put Lursa and B'Etor in this, and then
kill off Picard's family."
And you got Malcolm McDowell, who's the main villain, and you're like, again, if you understand writing and good storytelling, you've just blown it. You've got way too much going on in that show, and really what should have been a very simple script. So I always, one of the things you'll hear when we do our podcasts and talk about writing is don't crucify the writers on Star Trek, because there are, unfortunately, powers behind the scenes that are dictating demographics and ratings and things, and they say, hey, put a Wesley Crusher in so we can hit the female 15-year-old demographics, and the writers have to do it. It's unfortunately follow the money.
I read that Wesley Crusher was actually Roddenberry's idea, because it was his image of himself.
Yeah, it was,
and
that was Roddenberry's thing. Yeah, so it's true though. But there is a lot of times where they will move people around and do some weird episodes because they're just trying to try some things out and see how well they test. So, and that was the case in the movie. Josh, real quick, give me and I'd love to have those of you watching right now. You're watching this, just shoot us a line, let us know what episodes you really enjoy of The Next Generation. But Josh, give us your top. I know we're going to say both the Best of Both Worlds 1 and 2, and we're also going to say Yesterday's Enterprise. What are some of the other ones you would recommend people who have not watched a lot of The Next Generation to pick up?
Well, I not to be cliche about all this, but Inner Light is probably the best.
It is
probably one of the best episodes of Star Trek of all the series. And that's the one, of course, where Picard lives his second life, inside of the probe sort of thing, and plays the flute and has a wife and a kid played by his own son. And it was just great acting, and it was a great story, and it's a tearjerker. I mean, it's I didn't cry because I'm too manly for that. But it was just it's a great piece by Patrick Stewart, and it's just fantastic. I think again, as one you've mentioned already, is Darmok. Darmok and Jalard Tanagra, that's a great episode of another Picard episode. I think Picard made the whole series in many ways. Of course, Yesterday's Enterprise and Best of Both Worlds, but let's go over those. Let's skip over those because I think we all, if you're watching this, you probably already like those. But I really like The Perfect Mate, and it's not a very famous episode. It's the one with Famke Janssen, who went on to play Jean Grey in the X-Men movies. But
a really good Picard episode. A really good Picard episode.
Right. Well, I think that you'll notice a lot of my favorite episodes are Picard episodes, and of course this woman is the one that can become attractive to any man, including Worf or Riker, and Picard himself, and she's the perfect mate. She would be his perfect ideal mate, and instead of allowing him to fall to this temptation, he does his duty. Even despite the fact that she bonds with him anyway and goes off to be the wife of the king of that particular planet. And it's Famke Janssen. Yeah, I do love her. I would
definitely throw in Data's Day. That's a fun it's a good episode. It's an episode that you could tune in if you've never seen The Next Generation, and it explains who all the characters are and what their roles are, with a neat little couple subplots that are going on with a Vulcan traitor or a Romulan spy, whichever way you want to look at it. But it's that's a great episode, I think. Well written and a good one to watch.
As I mentioned before, one of my favorites is Tapestry, which is the one where Picard gets injured in his heart and kind of goes back and gets to relive part of his life where he got stabbed by the Nausicaans, and he plays it safe, and then he appears as a lieutenant, junior grade, guy with no career, no ambition, because he ended up playing his whole life safe. I just think that's great. And any episode with Q, I think, is great, with the exception of the one with the girl from the Wonder Years. That was kind of dumb. But the rest of the even All Good Things is a great episode. The final episode is a great episode of Picard and Q, and sort of the denouement of the first episode of Farpoint. You know, where sort of humanity's back on trial, and you know, it resolves in a really nice way. And Picard actually plays cards at the end. He kind of puts his guard down and comes and plays poker with the guys.
I think if you go through season 3, 4, and 5, you're in the meat of the sandwich of the Next Generation. You're going to get a lot of good episodes. The Pegasus and a lot of other ones are really good. But you'll I think if you're just again trying to tune in and maybe you're new to the whole Star Trek world and you're like, where do I pick up? I wouldn't waste your time with the first couple of seasons. I'd jump into at least season 3 and really even later season 3, getting into 4, 5, and 6. There's some really good episodes, and again, that's where you're going to find Picard in that red jacket that he wears. So, and again, please send us your comments. Let us know what you like, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, because we got a lot of stuff going on there. Because we just love Star Trek. It's great content, great series. It's great to discuss, and we want you to be a part of the Neutral Zone.
Well, and I will just say one thing before we go is one of my favorite parts of the Next Generation is the holodeck. I love the holodeck. I think it's one of the best things that has ever been on Star Trek. I'm kidding, of course, because I know that you hate the holodeck, so I just thought I'd bring it up.
I whenever the holodeck shows up, I just know the writers gave up, and it's like, that's, you know, if it had been the original series, we go to a planet that has the 1930s gangsters, but but they didn't do that. They used the holodeck.
Right.
The only thing I did enjoy was in First Contact when they used the holodeck, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense why they did it, but the whole concept that Picard goes in, has that tuxedo on, and is firing off, you know, an automatic machine gun at the Borg. Yeah, probably doesn't make any technical sense, but boy, is that a great moment in movie making. That's a great,
yeah. and I think that the Barclay stuff, the original Barclay stuff, was good with the holodeck too, and appropriately used. It was an escape device that didn't allow him to really interact with real people, and that's
if the holodeck was a real thing, they would have pulled him out of starships, because it nearly destroyed the Enterprise so many times. This little holodeck is just a bad piece of equipment. So.
Right. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and again, if you have any opinions or anything, share them with us here, or you can share them with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, MySpace. John, did we get the Prodigy page back up?
No, but we are going to work on a Netscape Navigator friendly page.
All right. Well, everybody, live long and prosper. Thanks for joining us in the Neutral Zone, and I hope that you join us for subsequent webinars and podcasts. Take it easy.